Now, UKIP's been in the news a fair bit this week. It almost goes without saying that these days. Nigel Farage got into hot water from some quarters with his comments about breastfeeding, and they've been accused of yet another policy flip-flop, this time on sex education. So is this what to expect from a party that's meant to be getting serious about election-winning policies? Let's remind ourselves what Mr Farage said after winning the European elections back in May.
We will unveil our manifesto, our outline manifesto, for the next general election, and we will do it in a town called Doncaster. It's a town for which Ed Miliband is the Member of Parliament. It's a town in which yesterday we topped the poll, and we will have an honest conversation with the British public about the cost of living crisis and about how we can make actually life better and more affordable for ordinary families in this country. So policy will happen at Doncaster in September.
And joined now the UKIP economic spokesman, the MEP Patrick O'Flynn. Welcome. What happened to the manifesto that Nigel Farage talked about in that clip?
Well, we did. We put out a lot of policies at Doncaster, an outline manifesto. We clearly couldn't put out the full, finished thing as early as September.
4 pages.
I think there were about sort of 80 or 90 policy commitments that we unveiled.
Well, are these all going to be in your manifesto?
Well, what we said at Doncaster, the positions our spokesman unveiled, is the platform for the manifesto.
Really? Well, you unveiled the idea that it was worth investigating having a luxury tax, the so-called WAG tax on luxury goods. That didn't last 48 hours, did it?
That one didn't make the cut, no.
But you weren't even allowed to investigate the proposition. So does Nigel Farage just make it up as he goes along?
Oh, he certainly doesn't. I think Nigel Farage...
Well, he did in your case.
Well, Nigel Farage is setting an agenda that the rest of the parties are sort of trying to follow in a fake diluted way. We saw the foreign aid debate in the House of Commons, for instance, where the Conservatives are sort of pretending to resile from their own target, but not really. Well, we're clear. We'll take $9 billion out of that budget.
I understand.
You asked for billions, the man before, and all he could do was talk about zero-based jargon. I'm offering you real sums of money here.
How does UKIP decide policy? Who determines it in the end?
It's a sort of collective operation. We have a head of policy, Tim Aker, who invites proposals and then sit round with a group of people, bring in the party's National Executive Committee as well, and decide which priorities make the cut and which don't.
It's basically Nigel Farage, isn't it?
Well, no, it's not. But it's not just Nigel Farage. But clearly, we have a party leader who leads, which is a bit of an innovation in contemporary politics.
Who you might say dictates. I mean, he slapped you down, and then over the VAT suggestion, then he slapped Mark Reckless down over immigration policy.
Well, look, I remember Tony Blair in my days as a journalist saying to me, "You're either a control freak or you've lost control." And if you have to decide which side of that fence to go on, then having control is probably the right option.
So it is the Nigel Farage show when it comes to policy?
Well, Nigel Farage is the dominant figure in the party who has transformed us from a 3% party to 18, 20 plus percent
party. Did you
just
have to swallow when your idea on VAT got kicked out the park?
Well, many of my ideas got enthusiastically adopted, not just by Nigel, but the next week by David Cameron, who's now talking again about raising the inheritance tax threshold, who's done a handbrake turn on proposals for the 40% of tax threshold.
Okay. In terms of direction, I mean, Welsh Labour, you had your first conference in Wales. Welsh Labour had a van going round with Nigel Farage holding a Thatcher mug, the quote saying, "I am a Thatcherite," which he had said years ago. Are you a Thatcherite?
No.
What are you?
I'm someone who's come into politics to get Britain back as a self-governing nation, number one. And the second big motivating factor for me is to make sure politics deliver for people who start off with very little but do the right thing and try and improve the circumstances of their families, their neighbourhoods, and the wider community, and indeed the nation. Would
it not be fair to say that as you move to try and get more disillusioned Labour votes, disillusioned left of centre votes, that you've dropped a lot of the trappings of the party had? A flat tax was very popular with Mr Farage. An insurance-based healthcare system was another idea as well that he liked.
Policy.
No, but he liked it and he talked about these things. Now you've gone for a much more kind of statist approach on economic policy. You love the NHS just as it is. You don't talk about flat taxes anymore.
Well, no, a flat tax in a highly developed economy like Britain would involve far too much of a transfer of income from the very wealthy to the less wealthy.
So you've moved?
Well, I don't support a flat tax. I consider it too right-wing.
And neither does your party now.
Yes, that's right.
You claim that the establishment's ganging up with its mates in the media to do UKIP down. Your party claims that. But surely if Nick Clegg or David Cameron had made the same comments about breastfeeding as Nigel Farage, the media would react in just the same way.
Well, look, if you look across Fleet Street, there are papers who are against us for ideological reasons on the left, and then there are papers who are against us because they've been traditionally Tory papers and they've swallowed this idea that we're only taking votes from the Conservatives. So we do have to deal with a kind of reasonably hostile media.
Sure, but they would jump in Mr. Clegg or they would jump in Mr. Cameron on the breastfeeding remarks. I mean, and if the papers found out the amount of money any party leader was having to spend to ferry its leader around with Range Rovers and protection, they'd publish that as well, wouldn't they?
Well, Nigel has had several kind of hostile
I understand the reason why he's
deserves being protected from it.
But the media's not picking on you by going into that. It's perfectly legitimate, isn't it?
Well, look, if you're talking about what the right to breastfeeding Claridge's in all circumstances, I'm afraid I define that as what the kids call a first world problem. If we're talking about policy priorities, that doesn't particularly engage me, I must say.
Now, people say that you're a back to the 50s party, or even to the early 60s. So why are you getting so upset by this Twitter account that takes us back to Trumpton? Which we can see up there, all these characters, and suddenly a poll has arrived and the people aren't very happy about it. Is that, I mean, why are you so upset about it? It's very funny.
It's amusing. I'm not upset at all. I actually tweeted them that the fire service roll call was actually a good joke, and I enjoyed it. But I also make the point that you get these things on Twitter which are the sort of, and I hesitate to use the phrase with Nick Watt sitting over there, but the Guardian Easter tendency talking to itself and reinforcing its own view. Meanwhile, 80% of the country is sort of agreeing with us, and I'm quite happy about that split.
Well, I'm sure it's only a matter of time before we have a UKIP Postman Pat as well. Thank you very much for joining us.